I don't think this will be a super long lecture, so that'll give us a chance to look at a couple of StoryMap examples. But we're going to dive into the world of ArcGIS Online, which I apologize in advance. I find ArcGIS Online disappointing in its breadth. I was really expecting that it would do more for me than it does as far as working in a collaborative environment. And I feel like it's not yet implemented in a really bomb-proof way. There's just managing this map that I set up to show you guys where the different final project locations are has been a bit of a nightmare. Every time I republish, or every time I add something to it, I have to go back and fix and republish. And there doesn't seem to be a consistently reliable workflow for updating my maps. But the initial publishing to get it online is really simple. So keep that in mind when you do start to work on your final projects. Try to get things as close to final in your final map as you can. And then when you publish it, you may find things that won't publish online smoothly. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's sometimes easier to just keep publishing maps than try to update an existing map. And as long as you're not sharing them with the entire UAA online environment, then that will be fine. You can just delete the ones you don't use and submit your final one. So, but I'll show you guys some more details on that. So basically what we're aiming at today is how do you create this, which is an embedded online map. And then we'll switch into talk briefly about StoryMaps. There's not really a whole lot to say about StoryMaps other than this is what they are and they're cool, and go forth and create. So that's what today will look like. And I think I'm about to show you a slide that I didn't update. I don't think I changed the announcements. No, that's not correct. So we are week 13. Lab 7 is due today before class. And today we're covering ArcGIS Online and StoryMaps. This Thursday's lab will be, Lab Z. Because I'm tired of numbering. And the only assigned reading today is to finish chapters 8 and 9. So there we go. Sorry about that. So the first step in preparing for this final project will be to find your Esri organization. It sounds simple, and it should be. If you followed the invitation that Kaisha Wong sent you at the beginning of the semester to add yourself to the organization in order to get your license and your Esri installation. So if you installed Esri in a different way, and I touched on this, I think, briefly last week, you will not see University of Alaska next to your name right here. If you followed that invitation and finished signing up for the University of Alaska Esri community, then you will see University of Alaska. And this is really critical because this is the portal through which you're going to share your web map and your story map. So next week's lab on Thursday, sorry, this week's lab, this coming Thursday, is a online map and a story map. And so it's really critical that you figure out before you come to class on Thursday whether or not you are signed in correctly. And if you want to check that today while we're talking, you're more than welcome, and I can try to answer some brief questions at the end about how to fix that. There's also some instructions in here on how to fix it, and instructions in your Lab Z instructions. So make sure you are logged in, and I'm showing you a map I wasn't supposed to show you. make sure that you are logged in to the uaa-geomatics.maps.arcgis.com, and you can click that link in order to visit the site. So that information is also here in this presentation, and then I've also added it to the final map instructions. We have your first 2 assignments for this map, and then how to check your ArcGIS Pro portal, and some cautionary instructions that we'll kind of talk about today. So again, please, if I haven't driven that point home enough, make sure that you are logged in to the UAA GIS portal. If you didn't finish that process and your invitation has expired, I need to know as soon as possible, because Dr. Wong is the only person who can do that as far as I know. Okay, so this is what it looks like when you sign into an Esri online organization. It's essentially a communal space for sharing GIS content. And it's actually really interesting when you look at the University of Alaska one, because this isn't just geomatics students. This is GIS professionals within the university. This is projects by university professors. This is special projects that have some sort of connection with the university that just happen to be hosted within our Esri platform. And there's content going back to the statewide spatial database and the GINA program, which was a really, it still exists in Fairbanks, but no longer is funded quite as robustly. So they don't, they're the ones that created the best data layer for Alaska, which you can still find in here, except I can't search. A PowerPoint presentation. So let me just bring this up really quickly, because there's cool stuff you can poke around in the content that's been shared to our GIS community. So I was pretty excited to see that this best data layer still exists. This is a compilation of all of the photos, aerial photos that the GINA project collected, I think until they were defunded in early to mid 2000s, and stopped bringing in imagery. Oh no, it's not going to fail on me now. You guys saw it in the preview, it's there. I don't know if that's just a bandwidth problem or what's going on, but it was working recently. Anyway, I won't waste a lot of time on that, but you can see they had the best available aerial imagery covering all of Alaska. You can still, I still use this KML file in Google Maps or Google Earth, and you can still stream some of it, but this website no longer exists, this alaskamapped.org website. So it's neat that it's embedded in here if it starts working again. So those are the kind of things that you can see within our organization. You'll tend to notice data layers that maybe aren't ready for public consumption. It's really easy not to notice the privacy settings on your maps and your layers when you share them. And that instantly makes them available to either your whole organization or anybody using ArcGIS. So it's important, especially for this class, that we pay attention to those privacy settings. Our goal is not to fill this gallery with a bunch of practice maps from GIS 101. So So that's up to you guys. When you publish your information, it will ask you whether or not you want to share. And I encourage you to pay attention to that when you're publishing. I will be adding all of you to groups for each of the class sections, which is one reason I need to know that you're able to log into the community so I can get your login info and add you to those groups so that we can share them amongst ourselves, but not to the entire university. So please pay attention to that when you're publishing. So what is a web map? It's just a GIS project map that you have published online, and part of our current license that we all have is fabulous ArcGIS Pro, extremely advanced with all of the fancy plugins license, is the ability to publish and share information using this ArcGIS online portal, but it also comes with some online editing capabilities. So a web map can have existing web layers embedded into it. You could add the GINA best available data layer if it starts working again to your map and have that be embedded in your web map to place your data over. Or you can build your own custom web layers, which is something we're going to do in our lab this week. And then once you have built this online web map, you can take it and you can embed it like I did on our website, or into your StoryMap, or use in ArcGIS applications, so you can build your own custom applications for your business or whatever project you have going on. Or you can use, Esri has a suite of applications that we'll talk about a little bit later to use your data out in the real world. So this has become a really powerful tool for collecting information from around the world. And there's a lot of really neat things that have been built out of that. There's also the garbage in, garbage out principle. The more data you collect from the public, the more you need to consider the accuracy and usability of that data. So the number one step, and I really want to emphasize this point because it can create a lot of frustration. I spent about 3 days on the phone with Esri trying to figure out how to deploy some collection applications on a tablet in Hawaii. So headed to a remote location, had very limited bandwidth available, and my portable map was not working. I couldn't get it to publish and work on the project because I didn't understand before I built it this underlying requirement, which is that every online map has to have a base map, and the base map's projection has to match the projection of your map. So what that means for us is the easiest approach is to use an Esri built-in base map, which all happen to be in a Web Mercator projection. So these all default to WGS84 Web Mercator. And then to make sure that your map follows that projection as well. And so I'm going to emphasize that in our lab this week and kind of kick it to death, because the worst experience that I have recently had and don't want to inflict on you is to build all of your map and then go to publish it online and have it not work and not really understand why. If that does happen, it's not a difficult project to correct for the most part, but you need to understand what they're asking you for. So I know at the beginning of the semester, I had you turn off the base map tool. It's kind of a cool, fun thing for building web maps, but I felt like it undermined your understanding of your map projection. So now we're going to add it back in and make sure you retain that understanding of your map projection, but now you get to play with this suite of web maps. Now, later on in a more advanced environment, if you want to build a web map with a different projection, you can do that. You just have to build your own base map. And that's not something that we're going to cover for lack of time, something that I've started to work on for my Hawaii project and basically ran out of computer processing power to finish it in time. So what's the #1 rule when you're building your web map? Audience?
To start with one of Esri's base maps.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't really put a lot of steps in between there. So you start with a base map, you add some stuff to your map, and then you do some error checking. So the error checking is a tool that would tell you your map doesn't, your base map doesn't match your feature projection. And this is what it's going to look like. So it's really important that you go through this analysis step. Oops. I don't know if I can hide that toolbar. As you go to publish your map, it will show an analyze button and a share button. You can skip right over to share, but if it finds errors when it's sharing, you'll wish you'd run the analyze. So always recommend that you at least run the analyze once before you try to publish. If you get a red X, then you have an error that has to be resolved before you can share your map. If you get a exclamation point, then you have essentially a warning that you can continue to publish. They're just warning you that there might be issues with what you're publishing. So this is going to be what happens if you try to publish your map without a base map that matches your map projection. And you'll need to fix that. And the easiest way to do that is there's going to be a little radio button that will show up when you hover over this, and there's a built-in process where Esri just converts your base map to match, or converts your map to match your base map. So for most of the projects, if they add a Esri built-in WGS 84 Web Mercator base map, it would just convert your map project over to Web Mercator. So this is a handy dandy little tool. If you've already started building your map, go ahead and add a base map to it and do this conversion. You can make it a really unobtrusive base map, or you can turn it off, I think, later in your sharing, or make it transparent so it's not interfering, but you do have to have it in there. And then, as I said, the warnings are usually things about performance issues or symbology. So a lot of the complicated symbology, even the kind of, I would say, moderately complex symbology that we've done in this class doesn't always publish in a web map. And that's not something I know how to predict until you go to do it. So I would recommend that you have some iterations of your draft before you put a huge amount of time into symbols and getting your map looking just perfect. Try publishing it and just see if there's any issues at your earlier steps. And like I said, you can publish your maps. Just make sure you do it privately and that you delete them from the organization later to conserve space. And basically we pay for long-term storage. So this is what it looks like when you've successfully published a web map with features in it. So all this is are, each of these are feature layers in a geodatabase with a very simple background map. And now that I've published it, it goes online. I can use the sharing tools to embed things. I can perform some basic analysis, and I can even continue to add and edit data within the web map environment now that it's published online. So you guys have all seen what that looks like embedded into our GIS site. on the back end of that, when I go to look at my content on the portal, this is the information panel pertaining to this map. So everything you publish into our online organization has an information page like this, and this is how you're going to manage all of the settings that you can change and the information attributes that you've assigned to it. So before you can publish a map, you have to put in some sort of description. So when you want to edit that description or your brief summary, you can come in, you can do that here. Oops. You can also see the layers that you've deployed here. And then you can access your settings. And then of course, there's a couple of handy built-in bars here. So this is how I would get back to that previous map view, is to open it in a map viewer, or if I want to open it in a desktop environment, I can do it right from the web page. So there's another piece of this, which is the software as a service feature. So that's basically ArcGIS Online. So we're using ArcGIS Pro, but our licenses also come with the ability to use ArcGIS Online, which is a cloud-based GIS with online editing capability, but it's not exactly like working in an ArcGIS Pro or an ArcMap desktop environment. It basically looks just like this example here, where you can add data, you can do some basic analysis, you can share, you can edit symbology right in here, but it's all going to be a lot more labor intensive and a lot more limited than what you could just do in an ArcGIS Pro environment and then publish it online. So we have that capability. I see it as more useful to people who don't have an ArcGIS Pro license, or if you have some reason where you don't have access to a computer that can run the desktop environment, you can do some basic editing and data analysis in this environment. Or if you had a reason where you needed to have a shared project that you couldn't share over a network, you could work collaboratively with somebody in this environment and do some basic map design within the ArcGIS Online software as a service editor. So I think once I started to figure out the limitations of ArcGIS Online and the way that it interfaces with ArcGIS Pro, it's more than the software as a service tool. I find all of the other things that you can then do with your data more interesting. So along with this institutional community, the UAA GIS community that you've gained access to, you're also immediately added to the Esri communities. And one of those is what they call their Living Atlas, which is a frankly pretty amazing collection of data from all types of sources and all around the world. So a lot of those layers and services that I showed you in our Lab C are available through the ArcGIS Living Atlas. For example, they have a wetlands layer where they take the same data that I was using from Fish and Wildlife, and somebody at Esri updates that information and builds it into a web map. Now, you have some of the same limitations in not being able to edit those like you do with a regular ArcGIS server, but it does give you another approach to the information. They also have these things called the live feeds that are like automatically updating with information from sources, and you can add those to your map. So your map will also automatically update. So I highly recommend, if you are struggling to figure out what you want to talk about in your story map for your project area, come take a look at the Living Atlas and see if there's information on here that would be useful for you. So they have everything from, information about things that cartographers care about, like boundaries and borders, to real-time updates of things that matter to people and the environment. So that's it for the Living Atlas. Is a pretty cool tool, and that comes with our license, so it's built in. And then on top of that community environment, there's also a whole suite of applications and tools that our licenses come with. So I don't know if any of you have played with any of the Esri apps for iPhone and the Android environments, but they do publish those, and most of them, all you need to use them is to log in with your user account. And what that does is give you access to the maps and the data that you've published in a mobile environment where you could then maybe go out and collect data using the GPS in your phone. So this was a tool that I was trying to get to work in Hawaii with a tablet that had a external GPS attached to it, because we were looking for a little bit higher accuracy in our data than we were going to get being out there without a good connection. And so there's a variety of different apps that are aimed at different types of data collection. So we're going to talk about that. But the general approach is to develop your information system, right? So we've talked a lot about database development and how to figure out what information you're trying to collect and how all of that should relate to each other, and what tools we have to make sure we're only collecting quality data, right? So we want to limit the information that people are allowed to input into a data field to things that make sense before we hand them this tablet and send them out into the world. Otherwise, you're going to get back a lot of chicken scratch that doesn't make sense to anybody, and you'll have to do a lot of questioning and QC. So the goal is to develop those systems ahead of time, and typically that's done in like an ArcGIS Pro or ArcMap environment, and then is deployed over ArcGIS Online to these mobile applications, and they can be taken offline, but that's how you initially deploy them. And then you can use these mobile devices to go out and collect new data, fill in fields, fill out forms, and then save that and bring it back to your central data collection. And that bringing it back can be physically bringing it back and synchronizing the device if you're in an offline environment, or it can be a web enabled, so you can just have things coming back real time. So one of those tools that I thought was interesting is this workforce deployment tool. So this is a system where you're actually monitoring in real time where your users are and which parts of their task list they've completed. So imagine you have, like, this is an example of a road crew. Each one of these is a person using this tablet in this workforce environment, and they need to accomplish these tasks at these different sites. And as they're completing them, they get checked off, and as it's happening, so you could provide more assignments in this area for this person because it looks like they've completed a lot. So these are really aimed at improving efficiency and managing a complex workforce. So not something that a 3-person operation necessarily needs, but when you're looking on a community basis, maybe for like a municipality with their workforce or very large companies, this stuff can be very time saving and therefore efficient and cost saving as well.
And all this requires to be within cell service coverage?
For a real-time update, you would need to have some sort of data connection, either data over cellular or some sort of other mobile connection device, which I think effectively limits it most of the time to cellular. So some of these other ones lend themselves a little bit more to an offline environment. This is ArcGIS Navigator, which when I first looked at this, I was like, why would you ever spend the time building your own navigator when we all have Google Maps and Apple Maps and whatever other versions there are out there? It just seems silly. Well, if you are working in an environment where expediting is a huge cost contributor to your business, it might make sense to analyze your own area or your own, should we say, destinations of interest and build your own systems. So you can then easily deploy that to your workers. And so now these people that you were tracking and giving assignments to and telling where to go, you can also tell them how to get there. So another Esri tool that maybe has limited application, but could be really cost effective for some people. So this is the tool that our project implemented and found really useful. And I use the collector app. They're now replacing that with field maps. And essentially what this is you publish a web map, just like we're doing right now. And then you've designed your backend database for collection, and your field workers can go out and they can draw new points, they can draw new lines, they can view existing infrastructure and look at its attributes. And then they can provide either real time if you're connected, or collect GIS data to bring back to the office and synchronize later. So it seems kind of in our modern environment like a not terribly revolutionary concept, but when you look at the history of GIS and how it's developed, and where we were taking paper maps and digitizing them to get them into a GIS system 20 years ago, and now we're walking around essentially making GIS in the field. That's a pretty amazing, powerful tool. It does require a fair amount of front end work. So you're gonna have to design this database and your collection system so that it can be implemented by your workers. They can't just create a new feature class easily in this environment and give it a bunch of fields and then fill them in. You know, some of it you have to predict what they might need to enter. But it's still often worth the effort. So. This is another interesting implementation of essentially the same theory, except it's driven a little bit more at a information gathering system. So I think it's a little bit misleading that they call it survey 123 because I immediately think about a physical survey environment where you have surveyors out collecting data. But what they're actually talking about is like surveys where you might go door to door collecting information about households or asking people questions. So the survey 123 has these built-in forms, and the only thing a form really is field data, right? So you build fields, and some of them can be fairly long text fields, so somebody can fill in a narrative, and then it's tied to a attribute location. So it's not hugely different from the collector environment, except that you have a little bit more limitation on the data types that you're able to collect, but it's more aimed at information gathering. And so both of those kind of lend themselves well to another part that we're not going to talk about, but another piece of this whole suite which is the Esri app development. So you can take these underlying platforms and build your own applications for it. And there are some well-known apps that are built on this platform, like things like going out and observing animals or plants in nature, and then filling in information about those. A lot of those are built on this Esri online structure. So it's kind of neat that you can, in your license with your capabilities, build a web map and then build this whole data collection empire around it. So you guys could go out and survey and record the what am I looking for? Losing my words. The status of every fire hydrant in Anchorage. Condition, that's the word I was looking for. Or something far more interesting, like where are all the food trucks today? So with that suite of tools, really what we're going to focus on is building the online map and then building that into a story map. And we've kind of glanced at a couple of these, and we'll look a little bit more in depth at some. I hope that the point of a story map is fairly straightforward and obvious, but if you have any questions, please do interrupt and ask, because I don't want this to be a point of confusion for people later. But essentially, it's just a tool to build what basically looks like a website to tell a story, and has all of these really simple tools for adding whatever you think you might need to your story. So we've talked about, what is the purpose of your map? What is the information that you're trying to impart to your viewer? And we've talked about how your style and your design affects that. And also just essentially understanding your message when you start building this map is a really key step. And this is just one more tool in getting that information in front of your viewer. So you've built this really informative map. You've put a lot of attention into your detail and your design, but there's still going to be people that don't get what you're trying to say. And this gives you the opportunity to attach words and pictures, and you can record yourself talking about how cool your map is and embed that in your story map. So, like I said, it's just one more information tool. So these are a couple of resources. I highly recommend grabbing a copy of this slideshow, which is linked from our site. If you haven't figured that out yet, every week we build a page, I link the slides. You can open them for yourself, and I'll have to fix the student copy of this one, but there it is. And here's the slides with all of these links. There's a huge amount of information out there about building story maps. So I tried to boil it down to the ones that I think are most helpful. And this final one is a tutorial that we're going to go through in our lab as one piece of our lab on Thursday.